Man, social media is just all over this, Jori. Everybody says Shedeur's falling, and there's a bigger gap than ever between Shedeur and Cam Ward. Did we buy? Is this news or noise from the senses that you can get, Jori, in what's happening in Indy?
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely talked to an executive today who had some serious questions about Shedeur, also an executive who very much is going off the Shedeur-Tom Brady connection, and would the Raiders do that? And I think it's interesting because when I consider, and I know we've been talking about the Raiders quarterback situation because they are going to be a common thread in all of these topics since they do not have an answer, as much as Pete Carroll said, what do you mean? Back in the day, Russell Wilson, we had a competition, it worked out fine, which, as I noted on the podcast the other day, the fact that he said it worked out fine and not great when the man had, 9 Pro Bowls and 2 Super Bowl appearances, including a Super Bowl title there, is wild to me, but also makes me question the degree to which he wants Russell Wilson. I digress. With regards to the Raiders and Shedeur Sanders, I think that if I'm the Raiders and I thought I was getting Michael Penix last year, and oh, by the way, Michael Penix looked just fine when he got in for the Falcons at the end of the year, despite the fact that they had 2 quarterbacks, I'm taking it pretty seriously and considering, do I trade up? Do I make some sort of splash somewhere? And Mark Davis does not strike me as an owner who wants to be relevant. So you could say falling, but you could also say falling to where, and are the Raiders going to move up so that they can try and close that gap between how much he falls?
I think it's noise. I really do. I mean, I thought it was interesting that's how, and again, I'm sitting here in Houston, I'm not there in Indianapolis, but when I started to make calls, that almost immediately that became a topic of conversation when you were talking to people was, hey, maybe Shedeur is not QB2 in this process anymore. And they weren't meaning he's QB1. They were saying maybe he's QB3. Maybe Jackson Dart is a guy who, gets his way, up the draft board by throwing in front of people in Indianapolis, has great workouts, has great interviews, doesn't come off as maybe overtly cocky, which, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but yeah, absolutely. Shedeur is very confident. Like we've seen him at the podium at the combine, and he just straight up said, I am a culture changer. You want to change? I've done it before a couple of times. That's what you're coming and you're getting me for. And I don't feel any pressure. You know who my dad is. He sounded a lot like Dion, I thought, at the podium. The reason why I think this is noise, though, is because when I got to the combine last year, the first couple of days, all I heard was, oh, Drake May, man, I don't know. There's these questions. He can't do this. He can't do that. Drake May, he could be the guy that ends up sliding in this draft. Yeah, he slid all the way to the 3rd pick. He did. I mean, come on, like, what are we doing here? And frankly, he slid to the 3rd pick because Jaden Daniels was the 2nd pick. And yeah, we now know why Jaden Daniels was the 2nd pick in the draft. I think it's ultimately going to be noise. I do think that who Shedeur is, what he brings to the table, both in terms of arm talent, holding on to the ball, taking sacks. There are going to be people, across the league. Some people are going to hate it. They're not going to like it. They're going to say, doesn't get the ball out fast enough, hates to hurt his his completion percentage, so he'll eat sacks rather than throw incompletions and throw the ball away. They won't like maybe how he presents himself at the podium. He's pretty brash. He's definitely cocky. He's definitely confident. And I think there are some people who get a little turned off by that, but there are others who will love it. And when I think about the Raiders, one of the things that Mark Davis loved about John Gruden was that John Gruden was cocky as hell, right? He was someone who represented, this is who we are. This is what we want to do. We're going to carry ourselves this way. And Shedeur fits that mold, I think, in terms of like what Raiders ownership, what, Mark Davis likes. He's got a relationship with Tom Brady over a long period of time. I just don't see him being, at the very least, I don't see him sliding to QB3. I would be surprised ultimately if that happens. So I think it's noise.
I also think that when you think about Cleveland being up there at the top of the draft and number 2, if Cam Ward is not available at 2, I was talking to someone today about what would it have been, the 2018 NFL draft, and they took Baker, and okay, Josh Rosen's there, and all these different things, because I've been trying to do some reporting on how does a guy like Josh Rosen get drafted in the 1st round and not make it in the NFL 4 years. Stay tuned on that. There are a lot of interesting different theories, but one of the things someone told me is, hey, when Cleveland's drafting, and it was someone who had familiarity with the organization, you need someone in Cleveland who can like embody that personality, who can be a little brash, who can be super confident. I'm going to be the one to turn that around. And that's why Baker was such a good culture fit for Cleveland. Yes, he had won. Yes, he had a lot of skill set, and we're seeing now in Tampa what he could do, but also forgetting some of how his tenure went from a mindset and personality standpoint. He was going to embody what that team is. Some teams want that, some teams don't. I mean, we've seen on the coaching standpoint, Vic Fangio was a bad fit in Miami. He was a fantastic fit in Philadelphia. And so I think it'll be interesting that the team that drafts Shedeur shouldn't just be focused on the arm talent. They should also be focused on, is he going to embody what our locker room and our city, because that matters.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. And by the way, the Browns, I can tell you when it comes to if Cam Ward is off the board, right? Let's say he goes 1 and they're sitting there and they're staring at Shedeur Sanders at 2. I don't think the Browns I don't know what their overall assessment is of him as a quarterback. I know that they are not worried about Dion. I know they are not worried. I think from their standpoint, from talking to people with the Browns, their conviction is if you believe he's the guy, you're not worried about Dion. You're not sitting there going, oh man, he's got the world's worst helicopter parent. And I've said this before with the biggest microphone, right? That's not something I think that'll ultimately factor into him. I also thought I thought it was really interesting listening to Andrew Berry, the general manager, at the podium when he got asked about Travis Hunter. And he said, we view him as a wide receiver. And I said, that means we do not view him as the second pick in the draft for us.
I've been having so many conversations about that with people this week, because I've had people tell me, no, he's a better DB. That's what you want him for. That's where he's going to have the most value. You like those ball skills at DB. You like the way he can get into the defensive formation. And then I've had others say, if speed is a question, maybe we should just go with the ball skills, make sure he gets on the receiver side. I don't think he's going to be a Denzel Ward lockdown corner. So it's interesting both that I've talked to executives and scouts who have opinions that he would be better at one or the other. And I've also talked to people who think, well, it might not be about what position he's best at. It's also what's the impact he's having. Is he going to get the ball more if he's a receiver than he's going to be targeted at corner? And so he's just going to impact the team more. But then when I talked to someone with Giants connections last night, they said, yeah, but we have Malik Neighbors. So like if we were drafting him, we don't need him at receiver in the same way. So part of it is going to be a need fit for the team. And the last thing I think is really interesting is, who am I to doubt a guy in terms of what he could do? I love people chasing their potential. That said, to have him come in and play on both sides of the ball at the NFL level, I just don't think it's realistic. It's not smart for his career longevity and his earnings. And if I'm his agent, I'm telling him not to do that. I also think that the ability to master 2 game plans, 2 schemes, 2 advanced scouting reports, trying to catch up between rooms. I think I said this on the podcast the other day, but there's a huge difference between when Micah Parsons was going between the linebacker and defensive line room in Dallas when I was there, and you're learning 1 game plan and scheme. You're just learning 2 potential responsibilities that you would have within that framework. This is 2 separate frameworks, and if you start making the mental errors and you start having these issues because you weren't in the meetings and you don't have the same ability to scout, it's not going to be a value add for the team, in my opinion.
The only thing I would throw into the Shedeur conversation on news or noise to me is like, I think the nuance of this, it's really hard to know until we know how free agency plays out. Like this concept that Shedeur is going to fall, like, okay, well, if Matt Stafford ends up a Giant and Sam Darnold ends up a Raider, then like, yeah, maybe Shedeur falls a little bit. Like, depends on what the Jets do, right? Like, who knows? So I think what we don't know right now is what the level of desperation will be in April. If the Giants and the Raiders and the Browns and the Jets have no answer at quarterback and don't do anything in free agency, if Stafford stays with the Rams and Sam Darnold gets franchised by the Vikings, for example, well, yeah, then nobody's going to fall because you're going to have 4 teams desperate to move up ahead of each other because they got to have a damn quarterback. So I just think this is the moment where we have to remind everybody there's a long time left in the offseason.
And there's an element of secrecy, too. Let's not forget, you and I were sitting there when Michael Penix got taken by an Atlanta Falcons team that we would have risked our entire mortgage saying they're not taking a quarterback. They just signed Kirk Cousins in free agency. So we also don't know if there's not a secret plan for some franchise that we're staring at them going, well, they don't have a quarterback need right now. That sometimes it just doesn't even matter in the NFL and they take guys anyway. So everybody, get prepared for the Patriots taking Shedeur Sanders.